Hey guys, today we'll be taking a look at the best and worst case scenarios for the Democrats in the 2022 midterm elections. So this would be the best case for both the Democrats and the Republicans. Now I could just go and give the Democrats 55, 56 seats if I wanted to, because that technically is a possible scenario, but I do want to make these a lot more realistic. So today we'll be taking a look at the most realistic best case scenarios for both parties after these midterms in the Senate. If you look at the 2020 results, 2020 was a good year for the Democrats. They were expected to also win in Maine, where Sarah Gideon was destroying Susan Collins in the polls for the entire election cycle. Same thing in North Carolina. Cal Cunningham was widely expected to defeat Tom Tillis. Those two races were obviously disappointments for the Democratic Party, but they were still able to make four pretty big flips. They won both seats in the state of Georgia against two Republican incumbents. Even against David Perdue, that flip was very difficult for the Democratic Party. They were able to defeat Martha McSally with Mark Kelly in Arizona, and in Colorado, the Democrats were able to flip that seat as well against Cory Gardner, the Republican incumbent. Now, these Republicans, they were elected in 2014, these incumbents that lost. 2014 was a very good year for Republicans. That's why you had Republicans winning in Colorado, and Cory Gardner won pretty comfortably in his previous election. So 2014 was a very good year for the GOP. It was after 6 years of Barack Obama when he was basically the least popular. And if you look at 2022, Joe Biden's popularity is pretty similar to what Barack Obama had at the worst point in his presidency. If you look at Barack Obama's numbers after 6 years in office, you will see that it was around the low 40s. Joe Biden now is already in the high 30s. This approval rating is going to have to change if the Democratic Party wants to do well in the next midterms. If you look at Biden's approval compared to Bill Clinton only held the Senate for the first 2 years in office. And looking at Biden and Clinton's numbers, you can see that it will be very difficult for the Democrats to retain Senate control if Biden's numbers do not go up anytime soon. However, of course, it is very possible that his numbers may go up in the coming months, and so that is what this best case scenario is based off of. If you look at the generic congressional ballot polling, in this type of polling, the Democrats have led since 2016 in the election of Donald Trump. It was really only at this point late last year that the Republicans finally took the lead in generic ballot polling, and so they are likely to have an edge over the Democrats until the race in November. This is not expected to change too much over the next couple of months, but I think that the Democrats are still able to do relatively well these midterms. I think that the Democratic Party has done a much better job at running stronger candidates in the races in which they are most vulnerable in. So I'm going to start off by filling in the solid states here in this best case scenario for the Democrats. Obviously, they're going to have their solid states winning with solid margins. These incumbents in these solid states obviously going to do very well. I have the state of Colorado as being likely, as well as the state of New Hampshire. So these are going to be 5 to 15% margins in these likely states, solid being over 15, lean of course being margins of 1 to 5, and less than 1% is going to be tilt. For the GOP, for their solid states, I am going to give them Idaho, both Dakotas, as well as most of the states here in the Deep South. The special election in Oklahoma is not going to be competitive. It is going to be basically a shoo-in for whoever the Republicans choose to nominate. And so, of course, the Republicans will win a few less solid states than they typically would. I will also give them Utah as being likely, along with Kentucky and Indiana. I think in Utah, Evan McMullin could do relatively well against Mike Lee, although I don't think that there really is a chance that Mike Lee does not win. But the polling has suggested that with vote splitting, Mike Lee could only win by a likely margin. Indiana and Kentucky, they were both likely in 2016. I think that Democrats can do relatively well there. They can also push these margins just a little bit lower than 15% and make them likely. I also have the state of Iowa as likely. I think that Chuck Grassley is going to face a pretty tough re-election this cycle nonetheless. By tough, I mean toughest for him so far in his career. Chuck Grassley has won by pretty solid margins in the previous elections. If you look at 2016, he was elected by 24%. In 2010, it was 31%. I think his age is going to hamper the margin that he is going to see in 2022, just like it did in 2016. It was a significant drop in the previous election. I think that Chuck Grassley being in almost his 90s 90s now, it will hurt him when he is running for re-election. He wants to be in the Senate until he is closer to 100 than he is to 90 years old. So in the state of Iowa, the polling right now does show Chuck Grassley only with a slight lead over the Democratic nominee. So I think Iowa could be a race to watch if things go well for the Democrats in the next couple of months. And as for lean states, I have the states of Missouri, North Carolina, and Florida. All three of these states, I really don't think Democrats have a chance in. Even in North Carolina, although this is a best case scenario, it really is not likely that Sherry Beasley is going to defeat Ted Budd in this race. I think that Ted Budd is going to win his first term in Congress as a result. If you do look at the polling, though, yes, the latest poll does show Sherry Beasley ahead, but every other poll has never put Sherry Beasley ahead of Ted Budd. If you look at the polling that has been done in the state of North Carolina, I think that it clearly shows that the Democratic Party does not stand too much of a chance. If you look at the predictions here, all of the sources, basically, except for RCP, surprisingly, has it as being lean for the Republicans. I think this is pretty accurate. I think it will be very difficult for the Democrats to end up winning in North Carolina. Florida, Marco Rubio is a very strong incumbent, even though I think Val Demings is a relatively stronger candidate on the Democratic side. I think it will still be very difficult for the representative to defeat Rubio, and I think that, of course, Val Demings will be out of Congress for the next couple of years. In the state of Missouri, Eric Greens is a relatively weak nominee. He is the current frontrunner for the GOP nomination. The former governor, he is going to alienate a lot of independent voters. In the state of Missouri, the GOP really does not need that many independent voters, but it will make this margin a little bit closer. If you look at the last two elections in Missouri, 2016, Roy Blunt only defeated Jason Kander by less than 3%, and he was running for his re-election. In 2018, of course, Josh Hawley defeated incumbent Claire McCaskill by 5.8%. So obviously, the races in Missouri have been relatively closer in the last couple of years, at least on the Senate level. If you go back to 2012, I mean, this was a huge change. Claire McCaskill won by a solid margin. This was, again, after 4 years of Barack Obama. Of course, in 2012, the Democrats were able to hold and retain control of the Senate, but they lost the House. Barack Obama only had control of the House for its first 2 years in office. So Claire McCaskill was able to win by such a solid margin, and then it was a 21% shift to the right in 2018. So, the state of Missouri, I think Democrats have absolutely no chance here, but the margins could obviously go a little bit lower, like we saw in both 2016 and 2018. As for the Democrats, for their lean states, starting off with the state of Pennsylvania, I do think that Pennsylvania could go into the lean Democratic column. I think that John Fetterman is a much better candidate than Mehmet Oz. I don't think there is too much doubt in that. Mehmet Oz is not even from the state. He has changed his positions on so many stances, and if you look at the primary results for the GOP, he only won 31.1% of the vote. Mehmet Oz's margin of victory was less than 1%, or was less than 1,000 votes, and this is going to hurt him. He is going to have to also get support from the entirety of his party first before, getting any support from independents or even potential Democrats. Now, looking at the results here for the Democratic primary, John Fetterman won the Democratic primary with 58.6% of the vote. And this was not the candidate that the Democratic establishment was pushing. The Democratic establishment wanted Conor Lamb as the candidate, and Conor Lamb would not have been a bad candidate. He was able to win 2 races in a very close district, a district that favored the GOP in the last couple of elections. So Conor Lamb is by no means a bad candidate, but I think that John Fetterman, the incumbent lieutenant governor, would do a much better job. And if you look at the polling between the two, you will see that really the only recent poll that has come out from Suffolk shows John Fetterman up at 46%, up 9 points against Mehmet Oz. So these polls are obviously very favorable for the Democratic Party, although there really has only been 2 of them. But John Fetterman, just subjectively, is a much better candidate than Mehmet Oz for the state of Pennsylvania. I mean, again, Mehmet Oz is not even from the state, hasn't really ever lived in the state of Pennsylvania. He ran in the state because Pennsylvania was open and there was no really very strong incumbent, or no incumbent, and no very strong frontrunner in the primary. So Pennsylvania, I'm going to give that to the Democrats. I also have the state of Arizona, where Mark Kelly is running for his re-election. I think that Mark Kelly is one of the stronger Democratic nominees. I do think the Democratic Party has done a good job at nominating strong individuals to run in their most competitive races. If you look at Arizona, Mark Kelly, the incumbent, if you look at the polling here that has been done for this race, Blake Masters is the one that was endorsed by Donald Trump. He led in the latest poll that has been released as well, although by a small margin. I think Arizona, this race is going to continue to be close. But looking at these numbers here, Mark Kelly is doing exceptionally well. And even though obviously the polls are going to get closer because most of these candidates are not that well known in the state, I do think that Mark Kelly here, obviously, as you know, this is very clear. He starts off at a good position in this race going into the next 5 months. If you look at these numbers here, Mark Kelly is at almost a majority in many of the polls that have been released. So even if the numbers do go up for these potential Republicans as their name recognition increases, I do think that Mark Kelly is one of the Democrats that are less vulnerable in these very much toss-up races. So I will give Arizona to the Democrats as being lean. Also, the state of Nevada, I will have that as tilt for the Democrats. I think that Catherine Cortez Masto winning her re-election will be very difficult. She is obviously running in a state that is trending more and more to the right against Adam Laxalt. The good news for her is that Adam Laxalt did lose to Steve Sisolak in 2018 for the governorship, so Adam Laxalt is not really some very popular Republican candidate. I think that he is one of the better ones that the Republicans have nominated this cycle. But Catherine Cortez Masto, she really is in a very tight spot. She might lead by double digits in the latest poll release, but this is clearly an outlier. If you look at the other polls, Laxalt has led in more polls that have been conducted, although many of them were conducted and funded by GOP PACs. So the polling here is very not great in Nevada at this point in time. We're really just going to have to see what happens in the next couple of months. But I think that Adam Laxalt is definitely a candidate that can win in Nevada, but in best case scenario for the Democratic Party, I will give it to Catherine Cortez Masto. And the final state I have for the Democrats, yes, even in their best case scenario, is the state of Georgia, and I have that as being tilt for the Democrats. So 51 in their best case scenario. Of course, Wisconsin and Ohio, I will give to the GOP as being tilt states. I think that in the state of Georgia, Raphael Warnock is a much better candidate than Herschel Walker. I think that there is no doubting that. Herschel Walker has hid a lot of stuff, and more stuff about him is coming out with his children, his family, his history of abuse and depression. And if you look at Walker just as a whole, the things that he's been saying, some of the things that he's been saying have just been nonsensical. Raphael Warnock is a better candidate, and if this year was not like 2022, where you have numbers like this for the Democratic Party, there's no doubt that Raphael Warnock would win the election. If Donald Trump won his re-election, Raphael Warnock would destroy Herschel Walker in this race. But if you look at, the race now in the scenario that we are in, it is difficult for Warnock. The latest two polls were a little bit more favorable for the Democratic incumbent, but there was a whole slew of polls from December until April of this year, or December of last year until April of this year, where Herschel Walker defeated Raphael Warnock by pretty significant margins in every single poll, and the margins got larger and larger as time went on. So the Democrats are really going to have to worry in the state of Georgia, but again, in their best case scenario as a Democratic incumbent, I do think that Warnock can win his re-election. And in both the states of Wisconsin and Ohio, I mean, even though this is a best case scenario, if you really think about it, it will be very unlikely for Democrats to actually defeat Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. In Ohio, same thing. I do think that the race in Ohio, Tim Ryan can do pretty well. I think that if this was more of a year like 2020, or if Donald Trump won his re-election and 2022 would be a blue wave year, I do think that Tim Ryan could do very well against J.D. Vance. But I think that obviously with the national environment now, he is very likely to lose. Even in a best case scenario, I don't have him winning. I do think though that Tim Ryan against J.D. Vance, Tim Ryan is a much better candidate, and I think that in a better year for the Democrats, he would have had a much better chance. If you do look at the polling here, Tim Ryan has actually led in most polls released, although many of them have been funded by the Democrats, although, you do have other more independent polls showing Ryan ahead as well, but in terms of latest polls, since the month of April of this year, you'll see that the only 2 polls Ryan has led in, they were funded by Democratic PACs. So Tim Ryan, he's probably going to lose, but I think that he can push that margin pretty low for the GOP. And so this is the best case scenario I have right now for the Democrats in the 2022 Senate elections. Now, their worst case scenario, of course, things are going to be a little bit different. I will have Utah as being solid, Iowa as being solid. Of course, Florida and North Carolina, I have both of these states as being likely. I think that Ted Budd and Marco Rubio can both win by well over 5%. Missouri is also going to be likely. So is Ohio. Indiana, Kentucky are obviously going to be solid. In the state of Wisconsin, I have this as likely as well. I think that Ron Johnson, who won by 3.4% in 2018 or 2016, can win by over 5% in this election. I will also have both the states of Illinois and Washington as likely for the Dems. In the state of Colorado, I'm going to have that as being lean, just because these states, the margins are a little bit lower on the classifications that we had before. Illinois and Washington, Patty Murray and Tammy Duckworth won their previous elections by just over 15%, around 17 to 18%. Colorado, Michael Bennett, I think that there's a very good chance that he can go under 5% for his margin there. However, I will give the GOP the state of Ohio as being likely as well. I think that I mentioned that, but I forgot to actually put it as likely. But in the state of Pennsylvania, I am going to have that as being a lean state. I think that in a good year for the GOP, they can hold on to Pennsylvania with Mehmet Oz. I think that Mehmet Oz is not a completely inviolable candidate. I just think that the GOP could have done a lot better, especially with David McCormick. In the state of New Hampshire, I'm going to have that as being tilt for the GOP, even though Maggie Hassan is a relatively stronger incumbent. I think that, with the fact that she was able to defeat an incumbent in 2016, Kelly Ayotte, and Maggie Hassan are polling is doing okay at this point in time. I think that surprises can definitely happen, and the GOP could still flip the state of New Hampshire. If you don't remember, in 2016, Hillary Clinton only won New Hampshire by 0.4%. Maggie Hassan won it by an even smaller margin, even though, of course, she was flipping the state. So that was a little bit different. But the state of New Hampshire can get very, very close. And in 2022, definitely there's a possibility that Republicans have of flipping the state. I will also give them the state of Georgia as being lean. I think that obviously this is a state that the GOP has controlled for a very long time. And I think that they can take it back in November. And the state of Arizona, Mark Kelly, even though he is a good nominee and his polling is very well right now and is doing very well in the polls right now, he can definitely still lose. I mean, he is still one of the most vulnerable senators running for their re-election. And finally, in the state of Nevada, I have that as being tilt as well for the GOP, with Catherine Cortez Masto losing to Adam Laxalt. So this map here, 54 for the GOP, 46 for the Democrats. Obviously, the GOP has a lot bigger room for improvement. I mean, really, if you look at the toss-up states on this map, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire. I mean, this really is very subjective, whether or not you include North Carolina. Is there really a chance that Ted Budd is going, or is there really a chance that Sherry Beasley is going to win? No, not really. I'm also going to include Wisconsin here. So if you look at these toss-up races, I mean, Wisconsin and North Carolina, I think it's pretty clear that these two are favoring, or these two races will favor the GOP this November. I think that it's very unlikely that the Democrats will do too well in these races. And if you look at New Hampshire, I mean, this one is held by Democrats. I think that they have the clear advantage here. But these 4 closest races, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, I mean, 3 of them the Democrats have to defend. This one in Pennsylvania really is the only one the Democratic Party is really able to have a good chance at flipping. And I think the Democrats have a better chance of flipping Pennsylvania than they do of even keeping Georgia and Nevada. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Again, the Democrats are obviously in a very tight spot at this point in time. Make sure you like this video down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below how you think the 2022 midterm elections will go and what you think about these best case scenarios I've given to both parties. Subscribe to my channel if you have not. Make sure to join my Discord server, link at the top of the description below, and I will see you guys in the next video.